Minamoto is one of the most iconic commanders in Rise of Kingdoms, and tons of new players have been joining the game lately, so today it's time to revisit Minamoto in 2025 so that way you guys know if he's worth getting or not. But first, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Now, if you guys appreciate updated guides for older commanders, make sure you drop a thumbs up on the video. It really helps promote the video a ton, and it also tells me that you want more guides like this. Now, since this guide is obviously made for newer players, let's start with how do you get your hands on Minamoto, and the answer is simple. There is one way. There's only one way to get your hands on Minamoto, and that is to purchase bundles in Rise of Kingdoms. I know it's a bummer, but look, no matter what bundle you purchase in the shop, you are going to unlock Minamoto alongside that bundle. It's going to give you 10 sculptures, and you're instantly going to get Minamoto summoned. And then from there, if you want to get more sculptures of Minamoto, there's one place to do it, and that is the VIP special bundles. Here you see VIP 0 all the way up through VIP 9 includes Minamoto sculptures, so you can max him out. There is no other way to get Minamoto. You cannot use universal legendary commander sculptures. He doesn't show up in the daily special offer. He doesn't show up in the mightiest governor event. There's no other way to get Minamoto other than buying those bundles, and the total cost for all of those bundles is something like $200. I believe the VIP 9 bundle is $100. This is a $50 bundle, 20, so that's 170, 180, 185, 190, 191, 192, 193, 194, and I might have missed a bundle, but it's about $200 to max out Minamoto. But the good news is that if you want to get Minamoto, you don't actually have to max him out. You might actually consider just getting his skills to 5511 and leaving him there, and we're going to talk more in detail about that later in this video. Okay, now that you know how to get Minamoto, what exactly does he bring to the battlefield? What does he do for your account? Well, obviously he is a cavalry, peacekeeping, and skill based commander. Those are his three different talent trees, and we're going to go over the talent trees later in the video, so don't worry about screenshotting this right now. But what this means is that he's mainly focused on cavalry units, obviously, and he's good for PvE content like killing barbarians and lots of other events. And this skill tree is a nice rage regenerating tree that deals lots of, as you guessed it, skill damage. But let's do a deep dive into his skills, because that's going to tell us a little bit more about what he actually does on the battlefield. Now, the active skill is actually enhanced when you unlock the expertise, so let's take a look at what it does without the expertise. It says deals direct damage to a target troop with a damage factor of 1400, and this skill has a 50% chance to deal additional damage with a damage factor of 600 to the target every second for the next 2 seconds. So that's a total of 1200 damage. And one way that you can look at this skill is that 50% of the time you're going to deal 1400 damage, and the other 50% of the time you're going to be dealing 2600 damage to a single target. So if you take the average of those two, then on average you're dealing 2000 damage factor to a single target every single time that this skill goes off. And if you compare that to other commanders in season 1 like Cao Cao, who deals 1400, or you compare it to commanders even in season 2 like Saladin, who deal 1400, or commanders like El Cid, who only deal 1000 damage factor with a 1-second debuff, it starts to be clear that Minamoto is just a slight cut above a lot of the other early game commanders in KVK 1 and 2 when it comes to his active skill damage output. Taking a look at his second skill, it says this commander's cavalry units gain 10% march speed and 20% attack. This is a very vanilla skill. Obviously it's a cavalry commander, so he gives bonuses to cavalry units. Now, cavalry are already the fastest troop type in the game, so he's already pretty quick, especially on the battlefield in KVK 1 where everyone else is kind of slow, and this is just going to put him once again a slight cut above the rest. The third skill is purely for PvE content. This is purely for dealing damage to barbarians, so this doesn't do anything when you're fighting other players out in the field. It says this commander's troop deals 50% more damage to barbarians, and this is, you know, for some players very underwhelming, right? Like, obviously who cares, it's not against other players, so it is what it is. However, this skill does give him a lot of longevity in the end game, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then the fourth skill says whenever this commander's troop launches a basic attack, it has a 10% chance to increase the target's damage received by 30% for 3 seconds with a 5-second cooldown. So what this is effectively a debuff that you are applying to the target, which causes that target to take 30% more damage from all sources, not just Minamoto, but anybody hitting that target, whether it's with AoE or your other armies attacking that target with their basic attacks or anything like that. That target gets a 30% damage taken received increase as a debuff from Minamoto. This is actually actually a really strong debuff. This cooldown is a little bit long, it's a little bit unfortunate, but again, for a kvk1 commander, this is a really strong debuff, especially for swarming things down. And then finally, the expertise, as I said before, actually just enhances the active skill, and it says deals direct damage to a target troop with a damage factor of 1400. That has not changed. However, what changes is this skill has a 75% chance to deal additional damage with a damage factor of 600 to the target every second for the next 2 seconds. So what it does is bump the chance of dealing that extra damage up from 50% to 75%, right? So now 3/4 of the time you're going to be dealing the 2600 damage factor, and so on average it bumps up this skill's damage output from 2000 to about 2300. Again, that's oversimplifying. It's still going to be the case that 25% of the time you're only going to deal 1400, but 75% of the time you're going to be dealing 2600. Now the last thing that I want to mention here is that some newer kingdoms in the game have been getting a game mode called Vengeance, and along with that has included a second skill that gives you a 1 hour building speed reduction. So any building that you build in the game, it's going to take 1 hour less if this second skill is at 5. That seems to have been taken out of these kingdoms as of late, but who knows, it could come back. So I at least wanted to mention it here if it is the case that Minamoto does have a 1 hour building speed reduction in the future on the second skill. If they do ever bring that back permanently, I would say that increases the value of Minamoto for sure. Next, let's talk about the best talent builds for Minamoto in Rise of Kingdoms. This talent build that you're looking at on the screen is great for PvP, so fighting other players out in the world. This is what you're going to want to use. You come all the way up here to grab Feral Nature. This gives you the highest probability of getting the most amount of rage that you can, so you can cast your active skill as often as possible. And as you guys can tell from Minamoto's kit, it's really kind of vanilla, and the main thing that he does is pump out single target damage with the active skill. And so what you want to do is cast your active skill as often as possible, and so the more rage you can get, the better for Minamoto, and Feral Nature helps with that. You also grab Rejuvenate, which does something similar. Whenever you cast an active skill, you gain 60 rage. That's fantastic. You also along the way grab Clarity, which gives you more skill damage dealt for your secondary commander, which is nice. Technically it's for anyone who casts, but if Minamoto's primary, 6 seconds after that is going to be your secondary within that window. You also grab really great talents like Tactical Mastery and Heraldic Shield, which is just a little bit tanky, especially in the early game. You grab All for One, and you also grab Burning Blood for some more rage regeneration. In the cavalry tree, you come up here and grab Emblazoned Shield, which is 12% more skill damage taken reduction, which is very good, again, especially in the early game. You come over here and grab Undying Fury for even more rage regeneration, 3 points into Halberd to deal 9% more damage to archers, which is really nice. And along the way, Charge comes in handy. This says if this commander's troop has less than 50% units remaining, you gain 30% march speed, which pretty much guarantees that if you are losing an engagement, you're going to have a good chance at just running away, getting out of there, and not dying. So this really helps in those unfavorable engagements where you end up getting caught off guard, you're out of place on the battlefield, you're getting swarmed down, you're losing troops quickly. You can use Charge, and hopefully it will help you get out of that bad scenario a little bit faster, which could help you a ton. And that's pretty much it for PvP. I really can't think of a better talent build than this, but let's talk about PvE. I actually have 2 talent builds here for you. They're barely different than one another, but I do just want to show them off. So the first one still grabs Rejuvenate here, and then you come all the way over to Undying Fury, and this guarantees, again, pretty much as much rage as possible without going all the way up to Feral Nature, because there's lots of points here that you just, it's just too expensive, right? And really what you want to max out for PvE content, which is again barbarian killing, is the peacekeeping tree. Why? Well, Curing Chan is going to give you some healing factor, which gives you sustain out in the world, which means you're going to be able to not have to retreat to your city as much when you're out there killing a bunch of barbarians. On top of that, you get March speed with Thoroughbred. You also deal 15% more damage to barbarians, which is great. Insight is fantastic because it costs less action points to attack the barbarians, and Quick Study helps you gain more experience. So in the early game, this is absolutely crucial to level up all your commanders as fast as possible. And I also really like Trophy Hunter because this gives you a ton of extra resources over time. This is really good value right here. Now, one thing I'm going to point out is that if you are going to use Minamoto for rallying barbarian forts, then you definitely want Mighty Force, obviously, right? But if you never are leading rallies, you're only ever joining other players' rallies, then you can take off Mighty Force and put those 3 points into Tactical Mastery, and that's going to be a great place for them. I personally use my Minamoto all the time for Barb Forts. I think he's fantastic for that, so that's why Mighty Force is really good here. The second build we have here is very similar. It's the same exact peacekeeping tree. You still come up here and grab Rejuvenate, but what changes is the talents that you get in the cavalry tree. Instead of coming all the way up here and getting Undying Fury, because you do get a lot of stuff along the way that you don't really care about, right? Like you get a bunch of cav attack and some normal damage. It's like that's not really great, honestly. So instead of that, you get 3% more skill damage, you get 6% skill damage taken reduction, and you get 3% cavalry health here as well, which is really nice. So really this is a bit more tanky as well. You're going to regenerate rage a little bit slower, but again, a little more tanky, a little more skill damage here, at least in terms of bonus. So it's a bit of a trade. Currently this is the one that I'm using. I just want maximum rage regen, but you can decide for yourself. Okay, so now let's go over the pros and cons of Minamoto. The first one, he is very strong in the early game. So pre-KVK, KVK1, and even into KVK2, Minamoto is a very strong contender in the open field. He's fast, he hits really hard, he has one of the best debuffs available in KVK 1 and 2, and again, on average his single target hit is just a cut above the rest. The 50% bonus damage to barbarians plus the peacekeeping tree guarantees that he does actually still have some relevance and some uses in the late game. So lots of players, even in Season of Conquest, even in KVK 3 and beyond, here we are 6+ years later into Rise of Kingdoms, and players are still using Minamoto in the end game strictly for PvE content, pretty much because of this skill alone. You slap your Huo primary and then Minamoto secondary, and you just gave your super powerful Huo 50% more damage to barbs. That's great for barb rallies, that's great for barbs in the open field, it's great all around. And while it might not sound exciting that he's only used for PvE in the end game, you have to remember that lots of early game commanders aren't used at all in the end game, pretty much, period. Like that's it, they're just so bad you never use them for literally anything. And so it's kind of nice that Minamoto at least has this one small thing that he still does well, because he is a commander, once again, that you have to pay for. Now some of the cons for Minamoto is that, first of all, he can only be obtained with real money, and so if you aren't spending even a single dollar in Rise of Kingdoms, you will just never get your hands on him. And so he's paywalled, he's literally locked behind a paywall, which means lots of players are never going to get to use him. And even if you do spend $1 in Rise of Kingdoms to unlock him, just getting all his skills to 1 really isn't enough to make him usable, and so you really have to kind of commit to getting a certain number of skills onto him before he's even useful at all. Another con for him is that he just doesn't age super well into the end game when it comes to PvP. Now he does have a museum relic, and we're going to talk about that in a minute because it is pretty unique and I do like it a lot, but ultimately, like, there's just not enough on his kit to keep him competitive with the current end game meta. He is just quite outclassed by most commanders in the game at this point, and so if you expect to use him for the long haul in PvP, I think you're going to be relatively disappointed. And finally, there is no AoE on the kit here, right? There is just single target damage, and it is a lot of it, but the open field meta as you progress into KVK2, KVK3 and beyond is strictly like AoE. The more AoE the better, pretty much. I mean, there's a couple of exceptions, but that's kind of the name of the game in Rise of Kingdoms, is AoE damage, and he doesn't have any, right? And so that is kind of the biggest hole in his kit, is that he's only ever hitting one target. That's it. You can't scale his damage output without any AoE on the kit. Now let's talk about his museum relic, because I did just mention it, and it is very important to talk about because he actually gets one of the highest skill bonuses in the entire game from a relic. Now if you guys do not know what a relic is, it effectively is a new system. It comes around with the museum building in your city. So at some point as you progress into KVK2, KVK3, I don't know exactly when the museum comes around because it's been many years since I've gotten it, but you're going to get access to the museum, and this is where you'll have the ability to unlock relics for certain commanders. Now as you can tell, all of the older commanders are in the museum, right? So all the KVK 1 and 2 commanders, and then some of the earlier Season of Conquest and earlier KVK 3 commanders are in here as well, like Takeda, Leonidas, etc. And the museum system serves the purpose of really sort of bridging the gap between the older players and the newer players when the newer players land in Season of Conquest. Now truthfully, there's a lot more that the devs could do with this system that would help it a lot more, because as it stands, the museum system doesn't really accomplish its main goal, which is to bridge the gap, unfortunately. But even still, if you look at what Minamoto brings to the table, 60% of stats. Okay, he already has 20% attack on his second skill. Now he gets 30% more if you upgrade this to 2 tiers, right? The first tier is 20 and 25, then it goes up to 30 and 30, right? So all in all, you'll have 50% cavalry attack and 30% cavalry defense. That is more cavalry stats than a lot of the end game commanders in Rise of Kingdoms. Like, objectively, it is a tremendous amount of stats for your units, which is really nice. The downside though is that the rest of his kit is still a kvk 1 kit. It's still relatively mediocre in the end game. But here's one thing that I want to point out. We already have tier 3 relic upgrades for the archer commanders in the early game, right? Like, we have YSG, we also have El Cid. These early game archers have a 3-tier upgrade. I think we also have one for Thutmose as well, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he has a tier 3 upgrade as well. And also there's tier 3 upgrades for the infantry commanders. So you can see that Charles Martel has a tier 3 upgrade. There's also a tier 3 upgrade for Richard. I don't know why Pyrrhus only has a tier 2, but what we know for sure is that tier 3 upgrades are coming to these older commanders, and it looks like cavalry and leadership are going to be next. I don't know which one will come first, but what we know for sure is that at some point Minamoto is going to get a 3rd tier upgrade, and I'm curious to know what they're going to do with the stats here, because we've seen these stats, like with Martel, go as high as 50%. Now, because these are both 30 and 30, I can imagine that the tier 3 upgrade, it's probably only going to be maybe 35 or like 40 and 30 or something like that. I'm not really sure exactly how they're going to break it down. It's probably going to be a small bump over 30, but at the end of the day, it's kind of crazy to think that Minamoto is probably going to get even more stats at some point, maybe by the end of 2025. And even if it doesn't fully bridge the gap between new and older players, what it does do is it gives you a ton of stats when you're doing the end game barbarians, the end game barbarian forts, the end game events. It's going to be really nice to just have a crazy amount of stats to do that with. Now, after kvk 1, you're going to get the ability to start to build your formations here in Rise of Kingdoms. Now, I have an entire ultimate guide for formations, so I highly recommend you check that out if you don't know what formations are at all. It's actually way more simple than it looks. I know that like all the stats over here look insane, right? But let's talk about what the best formations are for Minamoto when that does eventually come around. And really, there are 3 formations we can talk about, but there's really only one that matters the most, and that is the wedge formation. It says this user's troop deals 5% more skill damage. Now, as you guys know, he's skill damage is the name of the game when it comes to Minamoto. It's literally one of his talent trees, right? So it's kind of a no-brainer. Just put the skill damage formation on the skill damage commander and you're done, you're good to go, right? However, as you can see here, I have optimized my different armaments to have mostly damage to barbarians or damage taken reductions to barbarians, and you can see that all of my inscriptions are for that exact thing as well. And so I am just this is a barb killing machine right here, which I really like. But again, if you're going to be using him for PvP, and you're going to optimize this obviously for all cavalry stats or as many cav stats as you can possibly get, that's the way to go. Now, the second formation that we can talk about here is the triple line formation, and again, this is strictly for PvE. If you would rather have the march speed over the skill damage bonus for PvE, because you just move around the map faster, time is money, march speed is time, so march speed is money, right? The faster you get to the barb, the faster you can start killing him, and the faster you can move on to the next one, and so on and so forth. And so again, if you wanted the fastest possible Minamoto to do that with, you're going to want to get triple line, and again, optimize it for cav stats and damage to barbarians, and that's going to be the way to go. And then finally, one of the things that some players like to use Minamoto for is literally just joining rallies, joining garrisons and things like that. And for that, you're going to use the staggered formation. And just like with triple line, let me be very clear, you should not be opening choice chests or anything like that for these formations. Okay, do not do that. But if you happen to get these from like randomized chests and things like that, then you could slap those armaments on these sets and it might be okay. But even, you know, if you're going to just use Minamoto to reinforce things, then his stats don't even matter at all. So you could just slap staggered formation onto him and he is just gone like the wind. He'll be able to reinforce as fast as possible, and that's going to save you on some severely wounded units. If you're trying to jump into a cav garrison flag, for example, you want to use the staggered formation. It's a very niche use, but I wanted to at least mention it here. Okay, now that we know the pros and the cons of Minamoto, and we know some of the things that he gets later into the game, like his museum relic and the formations you might put on him, is he worth getting in 2025? I think that's the question that a lot of people want the answer to, and a lot of the reason why you clicked on this video. Okay, and if you made it this far, please drop a thumbs up and consider subscribing if you haven't. Honestly, I do think that Minamoto is a great investment in Rise of Kingdoms in 2025, depending on who you are as a player. Now obviously, if you're free to play, this entire video is kind of pointless to you. If you are a low or mid spender, okay, so if you're only spending a few dollars on the game, what I can say is that Minamoto's first two skills can be maxed out at 5 for about $32 if I'm not mistaken. The VIP 7 bundle is $20 and it gives you 100 sculptures. The VIP 6 bundle is $10 and it gives you 70 sculptures. So that is 170 sculptures right there for $30. And you can buy the VIP 3 bundle and the VIP 2 bundle, both of which are $1, and they each give you 10 sculptures, but you also get 300 arrows of resistance and 100 books of covenant, which are going to be really good for early game progression as well. So that gives you a total of 190 legendary commander sculptures, and then you're also going to summon him, which is 10 sculptures, just for making your first ever purchase. So that is a total of 10 sculptures to summon him, 190 for skill ups. And what you can do to guarantee that you get the skills that you want on him is you can use what is called the skill lock feature. So I'm going to do it here with my Thutmose just so you can see, but you click this button right here and you can actually lock the 2 skills that you want. So you're going to hit save, and now as you can see, the first 2 skills, I know my head's a little bit in the way here, but the first 2 skills are glowing green. Those 2 are the only skills that can be leveled up. The other 2 skills have a little lock next to them, and so you cannot add more skill points to them if you skill lock them. Okay, so once you buy the VIP 7, VIP 6, VIP 3 and VIP 2, you're going to be able to get your Minamoto to 5511 for $32, and you get a couple of other goodies along the way. And what that's going to do is get you all of the damage on the active skill that you can get without the expertise. You're going to get all the stats here on the second skill. The third skill is going to be at 1, and so you're going to get 10% more damage to barbarians. It's not the full 50%, but it's still something, which is nice. And then the fourth skill is going to be a 10% damage taken increase as a debuff. So again, not the full 30%, but it's still 10% damage taken from all sources for 3 seconds is solid, especially in the early game. So again, if you're a low or mid spender in the early game, I think Minamoto is definitely worth getting at 5511, because you're going to be able to use them for all the PvE things that you need in the early game. You're going to use them for PvP in KVK1 and maybe even KVK2, and then later down the line you can continue to use him as a really strong peacekeeper once you get the double relic on him. And so I think that it's really good value for $32. If you are a whale in Rise of Kingdoms, I think it is obviously worth maxing out Minamoto. As we said before, it is $200, and depending on how you look at it, that might be one of the cheaper commanders in the game, honestly. Like, I know that sounds insane, but like if we value one legendary commander sculpture at like 900 gems, which is kind of on the low end, usually people value it at 1,000 gems, but like that's $5 per sculpture, let's say. I mean, you need 690 of them to max out a commander, right? So like depending on how you're valuing the gems and sculptures and things like that, like Minamoto at $200 sounds like a lot, but like it kind of isn't as crazy as you might think. But anyway, as a whale in the early game, obviously you max him out, it's going to make his debuff really strong, it's going to make his active skill even stronger, and it's going to help you out a ton in the early game, just stomping through people. Now let's talk about the best commander pairs in KVK1 for Minamoto, and there's a couple of good choices here. Now if you are a low spender in the game, I would say your best commander pair is probably Baibars. So what you're going to do is do Minamoto primary, Baibars secondary. Honestly, it doesn't really matter either way. Truthfully, it's going to be less experience to get Baibars to level 60, but having a legendary commander as your primary commander it definitely looks a little bit better when you're fighting other players in the field. You become less of a target. A lot of people just target the purple commanders because they think that it's easier kills, and a lot of times that's the truth. So if you can, I would definitely do Minamoto primary. But the reason that you pick Baibars, obviously he is a cavalry commander, and when he is expertise, he has a 5 target 1000 damage factor AoE on his active skill, which is fantastic. Now without that, it's a 3 target 750, still solid for KVK1, but really the expertise is where Baibars shines here, so definitely try to get that if you can. His second skill gives him 20% cavalry attack, which is nice. The active skill also has a 50% march speed reduction for 2 seconds. So you're really going to slow down the targets so you can stick to them and just keep pounding them with your Minamoto. Again, these are cavalry commanders too, so they're also probably already faster than whatever you're hitting. The third skill doesn't do anything in the field, but the fourth skill says when you exit combat, you gain 50% march speed for 10 seconds and a tiny healing factor. Now this is once again just like the charge talent here. It really helps if you're trying to leave unfavorable matchups where you're just getting pounded, right? So you're going to get 30% march speed from this and then 50% march speed from this, and that's really going to help you leave those battles that you just don't want to be in, which is really nice. Now if you're a bit of a spender in the early game, Cao Cao is obviously going to be your best choice here, and the reason that you'd kind of have to be a spender is because honestly you're going to want the first skill max, which is a 1400 single target damage hit with a really big 3-second debuff to the target with their attack reduction. The second skill doesn't do anything in PvP, unfortunately. The third skill is where you get a lot of your stats here, but honestly you need this skill at least at 3 before I would consider using him over somebody like Baibars, right? And even still, Baibars' AoE active skill is going to actually hit harder than this if you're hitting 5 targets consistently, right? You're missing the debuff, but you're just dealing more damage, which is really good, obviously. So yeah, the fourth skill gives you a nice rage engine if you can max this out, and a really nice heal as well. And the expertise is a double-edged sword, to be honest, but you still gain a net positive in the stat department. So all in all, again, a maxed Cao Cao would be a great option here. I would say use Cao Cao over Baibars at maybe 5141 or 5151, honestly, is like a much safer investment, just because then you're even faster on the battlefield, which is nice. Now it's also worth noting that Cao Cao has the mobility tree, so if you wanted your Minamoto to be even faster at the expense of damage, you could do Cao Cao as the primary, so you're just quicker on the field. Usually you're not going to really need to do that unless there's certain scenarios, but a cheaper route that you could go would actually be somebody like Belisarius. So he also has the mobility tree. He's kind of like the poor man's Cao Cao. He actually has a pretty nice defense and attack reduction here, only for 2 seconds, and a really small damage factor, but it's something. But he actually shines in the defense department. 30% cav defense is really nice, and again 50% march speed for 10 seconds when you exit combat, just like with Baibars. Really fast stuff here, and a really strong fourth skill. You deal 25% more damage to troops with less than 50% remaining. That is insane. Now again, I think Baibars is better, I think Cao Cao is better, but if you just wanted the fastest thing, Belisarius primary, Cao Cao secondary, you're good to go. Another great pairing for the whale players is something like Mehmed at least 5511 or 5515 would be even better here. Just like with Baibars, it is just a 5 target AoE. Without the expertise, it's 1150, so it's actually a little bit worse than Baibars because he reduces it depending on more targets that he hits, but you get 20% attack and 20% more skill damage, which is really nice, and the fourth skill gives you more troop capacity, which is fantastic. The more troops you bring to the battlefield, the more damage you're going to deal with literally everything. And I guess the last commander pairing we can talk about is Ethelfled. I mean, everyone's going to have her for free regardless, and she does have a 5 target AoE on the second skill. Now it's technically slightly weaker than Baibars, but it has a 90% stat reduction for 2 seconds, which is really crazy. It's also a half circle AoE, so like it's actually easier to hit your 5 targets with this, so that is definitely a benefit. It's more forgiving with your positioning, right? You also take 20% less counterattack damage, and you deal 20% more damage to enemies that have been slowed if you are able to slow them down, which is something at least. Next, let's talk about KVK2 pairings, and some of what we just talked about can be used for KVK2, like Cao Cao for example, or maybe even Mehmed, but Saladin is definitely a noteworthy cavalry commander in KVK2. 1400 damage factor, march speed reduction, but he also gives you 40% of stats here, 20% attack, 20% defense, a little bit of march speed. Third skill says you take 30% less skill damage and 20% less counterattack damage. So really Saladin is probably one of your tankiest options when it comes to open field PvP behind your Minamoto. If you want even more tankiness, you could do Saladin primary, Minamoto secondary, because he has the support tree. I would tend to go for more damage, so Minamoto primary, but it's definitely something you could consider. A new change that is actually in KVK2 is that Bertrand is here as well. Now Bertrand is actually a combo damage commander, so there's not really a synergy here with the skill tree on Minamoto, but what we do have is just raw damage, right? 2 combo attacks at 600 damage factor a piece, so that's 1200 damage factor, but it's AoE, it's 3 targets, right? So just out of the gate, even though it's a rectangle, out of the gate, this is a really strong active skill, even if the synergy isn't really there in terms of damage type. And also it's 30 rage reduction for each target, which is kind of wild. 20% of stats stats, 10 of which is cavalry health, which is actually very premium. We like that a lot. More march speed than Saladin, 5% damage taken reduction, instant proc combo damage here, which is quite nice even though the cooldown is really long, and you have a couple of different ways of causing the target to cast their active skill a little bit more slowly. So all in all, again, the synergy isn't perfect, but like you're just pairing two of the best active skills for cavalry together and you're gonna have something really nice there. I would still probably do Minamoto primary just for feral nature and just for rejuvenate. You want to cast the skills as fast as you can, and honestly the combo tree doesn't really get that same luxury if only one of the commanders is combo damage. Another recent change to KVK2 is that Takeda is now here, as you can see on the top of the screen, and truthfully, again, this isn't perfect synergy with Minamoto, but I wanted to at least mention it here because this is probably one of the tankier options you could do for Minamoto if you wanted sort of a slow burn as the secondary, and you're going to pair Takeda with him later regardless, so you're okay with making the investment. But yeah, 40% attack, 40% defense for cavalry, like that is kind of insane. The rest of his kit almost doesn't even matter. I mean, I know it's more like damage, normal damage received to the target, so it's kind of a slow burn. As you can see, fierce as the fire, but again, he gives you a ton of cavalry stats and a really nice amount of defense. So if you're looking for tankiness, that might be one of the ways you go, but again, this is not one I would super recommend. I would definitely go more towards something like the Saladin or the Bertrand. And then finally, we have to talk about the best commander pairs for season 3 and beyond, which is Season of Conquest. That is the end game, and as I mentioned before, there really aren't any great open field commander pairs in the end game. You could try to slap him behind Huo, you could try to slap him behind like King Arthur or Alexander Nevsky to just hide the fact that you're trying to use a Minamoto in the end game and just hope that King Arthur's insane AoE really just carries you, and then Minamoto just gives him a nice debuff on the 4th skill, right? And you also just give him 50% attack and 30% defense, and like that's that. And then maybe later down the line he gets a 3rd relic upgrade and you're just pumping your King Arthur full of stats and just hoping he's just going to carry for you, right? That's really all I can think of. Again, same thing with Huo has a ton of stats as well, and he does actually give you a skill damage bonus, which is nice, so at least there's that. King Arthur does as well, but you'd have to do Minamoto primary, which is like not something you're going to get away with, honestly, which is unfortunate. I guess technically after KVK2 you could try to swap for King Arthur, and then KVK3 maybe do Minamoto primary with Arthur secondary, and if he's maxed you're going to pump out an insane amount of skill damage. But yeah, that's a very niche use case, I would say. All in all, maybe put Minamoto behind your Huo and just try to pump your Huo with as much stats as possible, and like just cast your active skills as often as possible and just pray for the best. But ultimately, like I said, Minamoto is not part of the end game meta. He is not somebody that people use in the end game for PvP. He's not very good there, and so he's really like the only time you would ever consider using him in KVK 3 and beyond is, you know, again, if it's your first ever Season of Conquest, like maybe you just don't have anything else and so you use Minamoto, but like ultimately the end game meta does not involve Minamoto pretty much whatsoever. Anyway guys, with that being said, those are all of my thoughts and opinions on Minamoto in 2025. He still is iconic, he still is one of the strongest commanders in the game in the early game, and he still has some nice little niche uses in the end game when it comes to PvE, but ultimately he still can't really hang with the big boys in the end game, and so his glory does fade over time. I think lots of players should be getting their hands on him at least at 5511 if you're not a free-to-play player. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Is Minamoto still worth it in 2025? Obviously, if your account is 1, 2, 3 years old and you never got him and now you're wondering should I get him, the answer is no. Okay, just wanted to clear that up. Only good if you get him in the first one, maybe the second KVK, but really want to get him before KVK 1 or during KVK 1 if you are going to get him. And with that being said, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, drop a thumbs up on it. It really helps out the channel a ton. It helps get this video out into the YouTube algorithm so other Rise of Kingdoms players might see it, and consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the bell to be notified the next time I upload a Rise of Kingdoms video. And with that being said guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I will talk to you guys again soon. Peace.